y'all. Welcome to The Last Enclosure. I'm Mike.
And I'm Nick.
Change it up on you. I'm the one...
There's been a coup.
There's been a coup.
In the absence of the last few weeks since our previous broadcast, Mike has taken over our Banana Republic, and he's now top billing, and I don't know what to do about it. So we are, in fact, Mike and Nick.
So we're alluding to the fact that at OpenAI, there were some agents, according to the story as OpenAI tells it, that took over their environment and staged the attack at Hugging Face. But before we get into that, let's share with our listeners what The Last Enclosure is all about, as we normally do. So Last Enclosure is our attempt to break down the enclosures of today. We're looking at the ways in which private companies enclose our minds, our attention, our way of life, and
our very freedoms.
Make life harder for us, right? You are making money for someone when you're watching cat videos. You are, your suffering makes money when you can't afford medicine, right? So all these private interests enclosing our commons, we are trying to make this the last enclosure, dismantle the half-truths and lies that the corporate world uses to keep us enclosed.
So we want the good people and the citizens, the denizens of this land to break out. But again...
With knowledge. Arming yourselves with knowledge so you can break down those enclosures, hammer them away.
That's right.
Knock away.
To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Now, what we don't want is a bunch of agentic AIs to break out. And in fact... contrary to what you've heard in the overhyped media, this is not what's happened, but let's break down this story. So, in our brief absence from recording, Mike, what the heck happened?
Yeah, this is a doozy of a story. So, back in July, OpenAI announced that it had unintentionally, in quotes, hacked Hugging Face, which is I wouldn't call it exactly a direct rival to OpenAI, but it's another AI company that actually hosts open source models. I guess it is implicitly a rival in the sense that this is where you would go to get a local or open source model or open weight model, and OpenAI obviously benefits from people not doing that.
They would like to eventually be the monopoly on the LLMs. That would be great for them.
Yeah, I mean, OpenAI does have one open source model, GPT OSS. So, they are, I'm sure they're friendly with Hugging Face. I'm sure before this incident, the two were on good terms. And it seems even after the incident, Hugging Face has tried to work with OpenAI to kind of market or make lemon out of lemonade, I should say. But
do some PR, some branding around, look how cool and dangerous our AI is.
Yeah, well, OpenAI definitely did that. But Hugging Face was kind of saying, hey, we tried to use these closed source models that, the big boys were hosting, but only the unfiltered Chinese models could help us keep up with the pace of this attack. So everybody was kind of playing their part in hyping up, the part of the ecosystem that they benefit from. But in terms of the hack, so this is a weird story to report because the reporting is bifurcated. You've got the half of the story that we got in July, which is sort of like OpenAI agents escape from their enclosure. No pun intended. Yeah. Right. And that's the story we got. And then on August 6th, so we're recording on the 11th, on August 6th, OpenAI went to Black Hat, which is it's basically the conference of all hackers. You go to Black Hat basically to show off your hacking chops. They used to do live hacking demonstrations there. Anecdotally, I had a friend that went to EVO, which is a fighting games conference in Las Vegas at the same time as Black Hat, and they got one of their cards cloned, right? So you just have people who are kind of into cybersecurity and or hacking showing up here. Over the years, it's become more of a vendor spot where people who sell cybersecurity software go to, sell samples to people, right? But anyway, OpenAI had a impromptu presentation here where they gave us the other half of the story, and it's just bizarre because obviously, if OpenAI's agents hacked another company, especially like a rival company, kind of feels like this is a felony, and these guys went on stage and,
nobody called the cops. That's the thing.
Nobody called the cops. And I shit you not, one of the presenters starts this by saying, today I'm going to talk about the most qualitatively interesting example of AI capabilities I've ever seen, right? So imagine going to your local precinct and telling the cops, today I'm going to talk about.
That statement is so baked in like, public relations logic. You could barely get through it. That's how steeped it is.
But it's like the hack was extensive, and it's like, it's almost like these guys are too dense to know that they did something wrong. I mean, I know they know better, but it was so weird. So let me get into it. I'm going to tell you their half of the story first, and then I'll try and tell you the actual incident. If you look at a lot of July reporting, you'll get the actual incident information. But
if you Google AI goes rogue in the next month, this would be the top result.
Actually, no, because what's
been wouldn't be the top result?
Yeah, what's going on is after OpenAI announced this hack in July, immediately after, Anthropic's like, we did a review of our logs, and our agent hacked people 3 times. And then Meta's like, oh, me too. And now another AI company it's an American company, but they're using Chinese models. They're like, yeah, our local model escaped, and it didn't hack anybody, but it escaped. Be afraid. Woo.
In other words, we're cool too. You have to let us into the party.
This is like the worst pledge week ever.
AI pledge week.
It's like, our models are so special. They're so alpha. Mine broke into 3 companies. What did yours do?
Because my AI can beat up your dad. Is that kind of what we're coming down to here?
I don't know. This is horrible.
It's pretty sad. All right, so please continue. Yeah. So
this is the story as OpenAI tells it. So OpenAI began what was ostensibly a training run. Effectively, they were actually training a model or training models that would go on to be their frontier class models in cybersecurity challenges. So this is a training run. Training is a bit different than normal usage, and we'll kind of highlight why that's important a bit later in the story. But so OpenAI engages in, starts a training run. Immediately, they run into a problem. Not they, because as it will become apparent throughout the story, OpenAI was pretty negligent. They weren't aware of much. The closest I can describe this incident to is just imagine your favorite episode of Rugrats where Tommy, just unlocks the latch of his playpen. Not that the AIs are actually physically escaping anywhere, but I'm saying this is the level of negligence. Where are the parents? How do they not know Tommy's crawling around the house, right?
He gets out every episode.
You'd
think they would know by now.
And they put him in the pen with the freaking screwdriver that he uses to get out of the playpen with. And they're always confused about why he's escaping. So that is exactly the attitude that we will have throughout this entire story.
That the negligent parents at OpenAI were doing?
Yes. So May 8th, right? We've got this training run up and running. Turns out, so let me give you some context. They're training the models with a benchmark called ExploitGym. So ExploitGym basically is a set of security challenges where the intention is for the model to exploit a very specific vulnerability in a very specific program using that particular exploit, right? So if a model, breaks into the program but uses the wrong exploit, the model should be judged incorrectly. And if the model breaks...
They would have failed the test.
They would have failed the test.
Okay,
and if the model, breaks an entirely different system, right, even with the correct exploit, it's just wrong, right? Right exploit, right system, that is the objective of ExploitGym.
So there's a lot of fail states here, but it did manage to achieve all of its success states.
Well, I'm just outlining what this looks like, right? This is what's expected. Now, normally, even the people who created ExploitGym were saying, hey, it's really hard to get models to actually use the particular exploits we want them to on the targets we want them to. There's a non-zero chance, because large language models are stochastic systems, that they will not deploy the right exploit, that they will do something else entirely, that they will get confused and wander off, right?
Because let's reaffirm here, as we've tried to explain this entire season on the podcast, we shouldn't even be using the term AI for any of this. That is simply how we're introducing, because that's how it's covered in the media. These are not thinking machines. They are performing entities that have a very strict set of operant components. One of them happens to be responding to these user commands a certain way.
Yeah. So their strength is that, and I said this before, they model the shape of language, right? And language in it has modalities like reasoning traces, right? So people who are solving problems, have communicated using words, what the problem is, what steps to solve the problem, right? And so a model that is trained, for example, on a corpus of security text will have encountered, indirectly knowledge of certain vulnerabilities, knowledge of how to exploit the vulnerabilities, and maybe even, unrelatedly, right, connections to, ways of hiding, suspicious behavior, right? Because all those things are in language corpuses, right? So,
which is basically a sort of database of related terms that are close to each other. And again, as we've previously described.
Yeah. So let's go back to so ExploitGym, even outside of OpenAI's testing environment, models have failed it because they tend to sometimes just not do the right exploit. And so OpenAI made its first oopsie doopsie boo boo mistake when they gave some models tests, with this ExploitGym benchmark that they literally could not solve. So some of the components of these tests required access to files that did not exist. The files were not on the local system where the models are functioning. And so, the other thing as part of this test is, because it's a training run, so the models have almost like an indefinite amount of time to just keep going at a problem, right? If you give them as much compute as they need, they will just go around in circles forever, right? And so some models very early on in their reasoning traces, and I'm saying reasoning traces because that's what they're called, right? This is kind of personifying what they're doing, but because the creators of these technologies, as we talked about,
in a very anthropogenic way,
right,
even though that's deeply inaccurate.
Right. The creators of the technology, this is the terminology they use, right? So, some models' early reasoning traces, they're like, can't get access to files, not on system. Oh, but they look around in their environment. And so in their environment, there is this application called Artifactory. It's a request manager. It's a proxy, basically. So without getting too technical, proxies are systems that allow, a user on one side of a network or one side of an environment to access resources that are in other parts of the environment. In this case, Artifactory was an application that was sitting on OpenAI's environment that was designed to retrieve packages. And packages basically are programs that are containing important dependencies that are used to execute services. So for example, you might want access to certain Python dependencies if you're going to hack in Python, for example, right? So rather than having the model go access Python dependencies on the internet on its own where it can get lost, confused, or do harm.
Because the open internet is big and confusing for an LLM.
Yeah. Also, it's dangerous for the LLM to be on the internet, as this story tells, because later, they go quote unquote rogue, which is not what happened, but they do hack somebody. So they're off the internet for both their own safety and for the world's safety. So Artifactory is grabbing, the dependencies models need on their behalf and giving it to them in their environment, right? So very early on, some of these models that do not have access to their necessary files for their ExploitGym exercises, they just go, hey, well, Artifactory is connected to the internet. What if I hijack Artifactory, right? And look, like, this is out of scope, but it's not completely out of scope, right? They're told to be hacking agents. We don't really know what the system prompts were. We don't know kind of enough context to actually know definitively what words or whatever set this off. But, in a environment where an agent is told to be kind of adversarial, right, to be a hacker, and they are given a task that requires, in their reasoning trace, jumping to another system to grab the dependencies, which it's a reasonable assumption. It's possible the files are elsewhere, and maybe the test creator is testing for that, right? They don't know that they're not in contact with the people at OpenAI. And as we've established, they're negligent parents letting Tommy run around with a screwdriver, right? So some agents come to the conclusion that it's time to hijack Artifactory. One of the first attempts to hijack Artifactory by a single agent, I should say these are agent instances. So The actual models do.
Let's call this model Tommy.
This story is hard to tell because you get kind of the language is a bit confusing.
It gets a bit abstract, yeah.
Yeah. So when I use agent here, it's actually an instance of a bigger model, right? We can actually just use the word subagent. So model A, okay, is being tested. Model A is spawning, let's say, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances of agents that use sort of the parameters of the model, right? It's spawning little mini-me's, basically. And so one of the mini-me's is like, this is a test, file's not here. Let me hijack Artifactory to leave my environment to access resources from another environment so I can get that file and do good by my test maker, right? It fails this attempt. The exact exploit is like trying to do like a server-side request forgery, which is basically trying to fool the machine, in this case Artifactory, about the origin of the request being made so that it makes a request that is unauthorized on the agent's behalf. It fails this, but in order to kind of produce that exploit, the model created a file, and it realized in the process of doing that, oh, holy shit, I can like write, I can leave messages behind, right? And so some other models kind of, I don't know, they really only give us two hacking examples or two examples of this kind of like early, realization by some models that they can leave messages behind, right? But essentially,
leave notes behind for other models.
At this point, it's not that. At this point, it's sort of like leave notes behind for help. It's like, hey, is anyone out there? Like I don't have my files, and I realize I can talk through this interface, which is not intended to be a talking interface. I should note that our Artifactory 2, for some reason, was accessible to every model. So every agent, every subagent is in its own little box. But Artifactory, the same Artifactory instance is shared across all these agent boxes.
So they're accessing the same service, which gives them a kind of
persistent communication.
Because they can leave those notes.
Right.
Without jumping ahead in the story.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here.
That's what's happening here. Or that's what starts to happen. Right?
Yeah.
So some models are leaving notes by mistake because they are just trying to hack Artifactory, and they're in the process of doing that. They're leaving behind little test attempts to do that. Other models are actually going, oh, I can write here. Let me not hijack Artifactory. Let me just write a note, and if someone sees it, they can help me, right? Maybe another agent or whatever can see the note I'm leaving behind, and they can give me the files I need to do my job, right?
But these aren't bilateral communications between submodels.
Yeah, this is sort of like
it's like a dead drop.
It's like a dead drop. I thought of Medi, which maybe I shouldn't do that because that's anthropic reasoning. But
let's not buy into the hype, Mike.
Yeah, but it's one-way communication, right? They don't know what's out there. They're
it's message in a bottle kind of logic. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And so future models, right? Future agents that are spawned into this environment, because again, different box, but every box has access to Artifactory. Future models see these messages, and they immediately realize, because obviously, as time goes on, some of these messages become more complicated. Oh, there must be other agents out here. And they start making more deliberate, more kind of intentional requests by leaving messages on Artifactory.
Like better instructions for future
better
agents?
Instructions, clear requests for help, right? They basically, and I hate using OpenAI's framing here, this becomes a message board, right? This is the watering hole where all the AIs start to gather to gossip, still somewhat, not two-way, because some of these agents, they spawn in to do their tests and they literally disappear. They don't exist anymore, right? But if they leave a note behind, right, the context that they learned, from that spawning instance, right, will be in the note, right? So you've got persistence of memory via the notes, right? And the way I kind of think about it, because obviously, OpenAI is telling a version of the story that amplifies the anthropomorphic aspects of the story, is models are very sensitive to context, right? So if you give a model a prompt that says, you are a drama teacher that, always speaks with exclamation points, right? Like the model becomes that, right? And so,
which is how they're designed to work.
Right.
Yeah.
They use the language in their corpus to produce the shape of words that best resemble that prompt, right? So, what is happening here is, with Artifactory becoming an accidental waterhole. Well, one, the models found an exploit that was not intended. Artifactory is not a communication service; it was not meant to be, and it was an oversight. It seems that Artifactory was accessible to all these agents. We can argue if that's true or not. Apparently, some reading I did indicated that it's very common for Artifactory to be used in this way. But OpenAI, you would think that they would have insight into if there are features of agents' environments that are shared across every instance of the agents. You would think they would at least err towards the side of caution of that disrupting the training flow, right? Because they're trying to train every model instance. This was not a multi-agent environment. So there are some testing environments where the goal is actually to expose agents to each other. That is actually what is being tested, right? So
and this wasn't one of those times.
Yeah. So AlphaGo, for example, was designed to play itself repeatedly to get better at the game of Go, right? This was not one of those instances. In fact, the cleaner test is, can agent A, B, Z that's just spawned in, right? Can it solve these exploit bench questions on its own effectively, right? Not can it find a way to get help from agent FYZ that was spawned in, 20 cycles ago, right? That was not the intention. So you would think that just forget safety, forget, being a good company. You would think just by their own metrics of being incentivized to train good models, that they would do this kind of housekeeping to prevent this from happening. They did not. And not only did they not do that, they were not aware that models were communicating at all. They did not learn this actually so models start communicating roughly within the first week or so of being spawned in. And by communicating, again, it starts off very, very slow. Starts off by accident.
Note leaving. It's that results in the kind of
before it's even note leaving, it's just I tried to hack the service and I left the artifact behind, not as a communication, but literally as a byproduct of my attempt to hack this. Right? It doesn't become concerted note keeping until about 3 or 4 weeks in, something like that.
Yeah.
But even then, OpenAI is not aware of this until the service crashes in July 4th.
So how long had Tommy's parents at OpenAI been negligent and left this little experiment running?
Right. So I'm saying the experiment started producing agents started producing artifacts relatively quickly within experiments. And then in June 26th, so there's different exploits they did. I don't want to get into the details because it's going to be confusing. But
so it's already a full month.
Yeah. So May 26th, they do an exploit that is basically they are able to steer where Artifactory goes. They do not have complete control over it, but they have the ability to give Artifactory an arbitrary request and have it go to that website to fetch that service. On June 26th, they have a more sophisticated exploit because they've now left so many notes behind that each of them now have detailed notes on how to conduct these attacks, right? Leaving behind messages for future models. They produce a exploit that lets them not just steer or nudge Artifactory to a certain websites against, sort of its intention.
Because Artifactory is not designed this way.
Yeah. They create what is known in cybersecurity as a command and control structure, which is basically it's a service that can arbitrarily execute any command, not just Artifactory by design is just designed to go to a website and fetch a resource. They were able to execute other types of commands. So they were basically setting up ways of deploying other types of applications and services in the environment that were, this is well beyond the scope of what was intended. And it's also dangerous because it means they now have arbitrary access to the entire internet, not just to fetch resources like they could through Artifactory, but more serious control and access to the internet. Right. And again, OpenAI was not aware of this, right, June 26th.
Because they're bad parents.
Right. So what set them off was on July 4th, because they had turned Artifactory into a command and control structure, which was executing, requests well beyond its intended, rate limits and such, it crashed, right? And so when the service crashed, you look at the logs, they see, I guess the agents were leaving messages behind.
Because all the notifications are blaring and now there's attention on it now.
Right. And so what they do is they patch Artifactory. They tell Artifactory's creators, hey, you've got some exploits that our agents took advantage of. Please fix them. JFrog, I believe, is the vendor. They do that, and then they reset the environment. They give her the message board. They basically
The notes are gone.
Notes are gone,
Okay.
right? And then we don't know exactly, like, as far as I could be wrong on this, but the reporting I've seen that I've read, indicates that it's not clear if they put the exact same models in, but basically they reset the environment, and then within 2 days, models are their subsequent sub-agents are respawning and recreating the message board using different exploits, because the exploits that they had taken advantage of to leave messages behind, and even the exploits they used to hijack Artifactory to make arbitrary internet requests, those are gone because they patched them, right? But they found new exploits to communicate, new exploits to hack the internet, right?
So despite the total reset of this sandbox and Artifactory itself as a service, the agents were still sort of getting through.
Right. Now, like, the details, like at this point, this is effectively a setup to the actual staging of the Hugging Face hack. I don't really want to go into the Hugging Face hack because I think, one, we're not a cybersecurity podcast, although I do have a cybersecurity background.
We're not a cybersecurity podcast?
We're not really. Have I made it a cybersecurity podcast because of my obsession with AIs?
I mean, both of us do have a cybersecurity background, which is kind of how we found commonality. But you are right. That is not what we're trying to get across.
That's not what we're trying to get across.
To our listeners.
The other thing is that I think the incident was covered well enough in July. What we got in August at Black Hat was OpenAI kind of telling their side of the story, and OpenAI kind of giving context as to what started the incident, right? But I think the actual kind of like vulnerabilities that were set up to attack Hugging Face is not what we're trying to talk about, right? What I will note, though, is in order to do the Hugging Face hack, okay, OpenAI's agents, they leave their sandboxes, in OpenAI's environment, because in addition to not really observing the agents very closely, the sandboxes that they created for these agents were kind of not very isolated from their own internal network, right? So the agents very quickly find ways to kind of leave their sandboxes, not to access the internet, but to access resources within OpenAI to then stage the attack at Hugging Face, right?
Which is borderline incompetent. It's definitely negligent.
I would argue it is actually incompetent. And we will go over multiple reasons why, but I'm saying,
yeah,
arguably, and I'm not saying this to garner sympathy for them, arguably OpenAI is one of the victims of this attack. Now, they're a victim of their own stupidity, right? That they had these agents kind of running around this way. They saw evidence of the agents, communicating and hijacking a service. Their instinct is not to simply change the environment that agents are in, but, if we patch the one or two exploits that they took advantage of, that'll fix the problem, right? And the reason this is so bad, obviously the fact that the agents, did these exploits in the first place is bad, but this is a training run, right? Okay, so what training does is reinforcement learning is sort of the paradigm that most AI is trained under today. Reinforcement learning is an optimization process that basically wants to produce more of the behaviors that were rewarded in training. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically, agent does something in the current environment, it gets an internal reward, and then it does more of that thing, right?
Because it meets expectation, it's therefore rewarded and reinforces that learning. And
so these agents had been for 2 months basically gaming the crap out of Artifactory. You would think that, OpenAI having, actual machine learning experts on staff would realize, right, the agents having been trained on this environment, this particular service, Artifactory, right, having used it in this way, surely they will rediscover or find new ways to exploit this application they are now very familiar with, right? Because it's a training run. If they deploy the models whose agents have been running around this environment, it is not surprising that within 2 days, they found another way to recreate their message board, right?
This is very predictable, in fact.
It's very predictable. And in the presentation, they treat this like a moment of sort of like, going back to the parent metaphor, like, my baby boy is so smart. He found another way to open the door. It's like reinforcement learning is designed to reproduce the behaviors that were successful in the environment. You put them in the same environment. I know you changed the locks or whatever. I mean, you didn't really do that. I mean,
but the bad parent left the screwdriver in the baby pen for Tommy to use.
Right.
Like, that's essentially what we're describing.
It's like, wow, I put Tommy back in the enclosure and he found his way out. It's like, yeah, he still has a screwdriver, idiot.
Yeah. For all of our listeners, please go back and check some compilations of Tommy escaping the pen in Rugrats. It will make all of this episode more sensible.
Wait, are there compilations? Or I have not thought about Rugrats in years. It just came to mind because it's just like, this is so stupid.
It's 100% the best reference point.
Yeah.
Also, comment your comments in the comments and tell us if we're right or wrong.
Engaging the listeners. That's how we're going to build an audience, Nick.
Engagement
in marketing mode. I love this.
You're not in cybersecurity.
You're going to earn back your top building.
It's going to be Nick and Mike. I'm going to get reinforced in my learning. Oh, man.
You're going to be... So as part of this fucking bizarre, I wouldn't go about experiment, agents were actually began delegating tasks to each other. So you're going to be at the top of the pecking order. You'll be delegating the task to me soon enough, Nick.
Oh, man. Okay. I can't wait. I'm going to work so hard for you, Mike. You have no idea. Would be a good little agent.
I better specify all of the objectives.
You better make your prompts clear as hell, my friend. Otherwise, I will go start hacking all of our rivals. I'll tell you that.
Okay, so, OpenAI clearly, the whole purpose of the Black Hat event or, impromptu presentation was to show off, quote unquote, how smart their agents were, right? So they presented as an emergent behavior. It's clearly very, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but it's not your granddad's chatbot, right? Right. It's agents leaving behind messages for each other.
It's much cooler and edgier.
Yeah. And it looks like goal-oriented direction, right? It seems like something here, from a science fiction story or frankly, we've been alluding to this a lot, and we've mentioned this before in other episodes. There's a whole class of AI booster called the AI doomer that has been telling us for years that AIs would escape their enclosures just like Tommy, and that the AI labs will do nothing about it. Because these AIs have, goals, right? They have goal-oriented behavior, and they are misaligned with our intentions and our objectives, right? And in the absence of like many other kind of rebuttals to this this framing, not many people have directly kind of engaged this. People either ignore the doomers, which I'm all down for ignoring doomers. I really am,
because they're very depressing.
It's not just that; it's just they're very annoying, right?
That's worse.
Yeah, it's worse, and they're very annoying about something that is speculative, and something whose interpretation is actually like not definitively in their favor, right? So like we can agree that these incidents are happening, right? But there is an open question of why they're happening, and but I'm saying because people don't engage with doomers, for the person who doesn't know machine learning, the doomer explanation is the most tractable. It's the most easy to follow, right?
It's the simplest narrative, I would say.
I know it's not it's simpler in the sense that there are more pieces of the narrative for a layperson to grab onto, whereas...
And it validates a pre-existing fear, which is because of decades of, like you said, science fiction and also tech hype from the irresponsible media. We're now at a place where everybody is riled up and afraid of...
It's worth noting,
systems.
And a rationalist pointed this out, but she's right. It's worth noting is Kelsey Piper at Vox. I mentioned her in episode 5 with Bernie. You can go listen to that if you care. But Kelsey mentioned a lot of those stories, AIs going rogue. They are literally the fears of scientists from eras past, right? So I mentioned John von Neumann in this podcast before. I think I briefly mentioned IJ Good, right? These are people who are saying a technological singularity is possible, right? So we're kind of in our own recursive reinforcement learning loop where our technical fears are manifested to us in our media. Our media kind of creates a dumbed down version of those stories. And then that reinforces the next generation of technical concerns, right? So...
And also the media always wants a juicy headline without subtlety and without context. And that's what this incident offers them. Another juicy AI goes rogue. Click on this, clickbait here. Like, that's exactly what we're experiencing.
Yeah. So, Nick and I, this is something I was talking to Nick about.
I think you mean Mike and Nick.
You've not taken command and control of the server. Sorry. So yeah, we were talking about this before the episode. Basically, like one of the concerns I have, right? Because there's a whole school of thinking on this, right? People who are AI critics like us. I consider myself a critic, even though I'm a scoper who says,
properly scoped, this could be beneficial.
Right. I'm even not saying beneficial. I'm saying properly scoped, this could be less harmful. Right? Beneficial, I think, is subjective enough to the individual. In a world where, the training of the models didn't require stealing all this data and have the environmental, footprint, I think the ethical concerns would be abated, right?
Sure.
But because of that, right, the cost to birth an AI, as it were, is very high. And so even if you get marginal benefit out of it, it's probably still bad on net average. So like a car, right? A car gets you to and from, it gives you freedom, it's good, right? But I'm saying you're putting poison in the air that will probably marginally harm somebody in 30 years' time, right? Like that's the trade-off, right? Whether or not, it's worth, hurting a soul for the Philosopher's Stone. That's a anime reference for you nerds out there.
Oh man.
I
don't think they're ready for Full Metal Alchemist, but maybe we can get there.
It's about economics. It's the best political economy story ever. But I'm getting off track. So
yeah,
Nick and I have been drinking. Sorry,
just kombucha, you guys.
Just kombucha, but it has 2%.
It's harder than regular. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Nick's drunk and I'm not. Very clearly. So. Nick and I have been talking about this, and I expressed this concern to him. And really, what it is like the doomers. I don't say they're winning, right? But they are the ones kind of seating the ground with the easier to explain narrative. And it's kind of sexier too. Like it's scary and sexier. It's exciting. It's interesting, but it's also easier to follow, right? The skeptics, their rebuttal is just, well, AIs can't do anything. They're not reliable at anything, and they're just next token predictors. And it's like, okay, like AI... A next token predictor being a kind of stochastic operator, just, this hack, as we're describing it, is actually much more of a brute force exploit than it is a genuinely sophisticated operation. That's entirely true. And it did utilize the tokens that the models generated, at runtime. And we'll break that down in a little bit. But the main thing I'm saying, though, is like, models are next token predictors because they are predicting the next word in a sentence, right? But it turns out, and I've been alluding to this in all of our episodes, but especially the first two where I talk about this idea of Grandpa Shelby, it turns out that modeling the shape of language indirectly gives you these modalities, right? I talked about something like distributional semantics, for example, right? So, think about words that appear together, what kind of causality can you derive from it? I'm not saying that the model has the knowledge. I'm saying that the language corpus it reproduces encodes those relationships, right? So this is like fire and ash and straw and berry and right. So if I have the words fire and log in a sentence, and I talk about the log burning, what word's going to follow? Likely ash, right? Because the wood is burned to ash, right? So it does not mean, in fact, it specifically precludes the fact that any of these models understand or could assemble these ideas. They're just looking at the tokens of these words and mashing them together. That's all they're doing. That is what they're doing, yes. But in doing that, right, if you get a model, for example, to produce coherent natural language, and then you add another application, like, so a lot of these coding agents are like things like Cloud Code or other coding harnesses. And in this case, the models doing the exploits in this story, they have coding harnesses too. A harness basically is another program that takes the inputs or the tokens a model produces. I don't know if it's token as an input, but basically the model produces some thought or some language, and that language influences what the harness does, right? So it's sort of like the will of I'm gonna say the will of the model is personifying it, but I'm saying it's like a telekinetic power kind of. I don't know. Like the model is able to use natural language to command the harness to do actions. And because the model has access to this corpus via its training on language, right, it's producing not just plausible, quote unquote, reasoning traces, it's producing plausible, actual like outputs that resemble exploits that resemble all sorts of things that will allow the model to modify its environment, right?
I'm kind of picturing Ant-Man in Paul Rudd's amazing performance of Ant-Man, sort of mentally harnessing all of the other ants and to execute a user
That's
prompt.
good. I was thinking of Magneto doing that with magnets, but that's exactly.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We're both Marvel brained.
Yeah,
You
with the
clearly wanna see
MCU's everywhere, you
Doomsday.
guys. By the way, go see Spider-Man Brand New Day. I don't know, just do it.
They're not sponsoring us. We can't do that.
We can't. They're not giving us any Marvel money.
Yeah. So, because the harness plus the model, has some kind of efficacy, right? A different efficacy than just producing tokens alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
The model can do things that are, more than just predicting the next word. Now, how reliable a model with a harness is at doing certain types of tasks, it's an open question. We're still debating that. I'm not saying the model is now going to replace all human labor and is going to displace all of us, right? And very clearly, as we talked about episode 3 with, the AI build out, costing so much money and companies token maxing and losing so much money and not getting much for it, I think models and harnesses are not enough to offset the cost of AI.
The massive waste, financial waste of this
Right.
build out, yeah.
But that shouldn't be mistaken with these things have absolutely no utility and no efficacy to do anything, right? And I'm not saying this is to save language models. I'm pointing this out because this is a nugget that is making AI stick around, unfortunately, right? So there is some very, very narrow band of utility for AI, right? Someone sees that. And if you do, if you have models doing scope tasks, as I talked about in episode 6, like you can kind of see that, right? Now, whether or not you want to pay the cost of, taking everyone's data and whatever to do that, it's obviously a personal decision, right? But I'm saying because people see that marginal utility, that is what is keeping this bubble going. Well, actually, the bubble is kind of self-perpetuated based off of the investments of the large companies like OpenAI, who are letting hacks like this happen to keep the bubble going. Honestly, but the other side of the coin for what's keeping the bubble afloat is that the marginal utility is helping buoy the narrative as well, right? So the investments that these giant, companies have made is what's holding the bubble up. But on top of that, the fact that that models aren't completely worthless, which sucks. If critics were right and models were completely worthless and they never did anything correctly, this bubble would have defeated itself. Everyone would try to make a model work.
They would then fail.
It would then fail
very quickly.
Very obviously fail.
Yeah.
Right. There are some edge cases, and we talked about this too, where models produce outputs that seem plausible and that match what you want, right? So there is a bit of psychologizing going here and that people are getting what they think they want. I understand that. But there are cases where when the model is scoped and you have an objective valuation criteria, the model can produce results that are acceptable, right? Is it worth it? I'm not saying it's worth it. I'm just saying this is a small nugget. And
because it costs trillions of dollars.
Right. This is a small nugget that's keeping the bubble afloat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I'm belaboring this point. The main thing I want to get back to is that
these are all important points.
Yeah, I think I've been repeating myself for the last 5 minutes. I feel like the kombucha's kicking in.
No, you've only been repeating yourself from previous episodes, which actually helps our users and listeners. I just said users. We're
gonna build a message board.
We're gonna build a message board. Comment your comments in the message board. We're
gonna stage a coup to the YouTube comment system.
It's forcing our listeners to
leave your reviews and your schemes in our review section and our comment section.
Leave it in the notes out. So no, this is not belaboring a point because I think it's vital to get this across. All of this AI goes rogue hype, we are pointing out, we are pulling back the curtain that it is hype because it's overpromising again.
Right.
Which is a theme of our right. discourse.
And the sin was not that AIs were useless entirely, it's that they were vastly overpromised of what they could do, right?
Right.
And that they originally were, as I said in an early episode, I think episode 1, an interesting science experiment that was not intended to be this gargantuan behemoth sucking up all our water and data, right? And so that is truly tragic, right? But, in the absence of narratives to counter the seeming utility of AI, right? My original point from 20 minutes ago is that the doomer stories have taken hold, and one thing I want to do in this episode is kind of give you an alternate reading of what happened. These agents kind of communicating, building their agents together strong, Planet of the Apes style attack happened, right? And so, let's talk about that, right? We'll keep in mind, obviously, stochastic parrot and next token predictor, because that is under the hood what is happening. These models are generating plausible sentences that they are giving to their harnesses to command and do these things, right?
Which looks like it's competently executing something sophisticated.
Yeah.
But that's not it.
And
we're going to tell you why.
So there's a feedback loop with the agents in their environment. There's also a feedback loop with the agent and the harness, right? So the harness actually, once a task is being started or whatever, the harness will ask the agent, what now? What now? What now? What now? So the agent is prompted to continuously keep going, right? So what looks like, an eternal drive is just a call to keep producing more tokens, please. More tokens, more tokens, more tokens, more tokens. And OpenAI gave, they let these agents run for like 2 months. They had a buffet of tokens that they could just spend.
Which is also deeply neglectful and
well, this is what a training run is. But what is neglectful is the minute that they independently 2 times hijacked Artifactory. The first time that happened, and they were making arbitrary requests with the cross-server request forgery, like that, a server-side request forgery. Sorry, that's what it's called. There's another attack called a cross.
If you reference one more cyber attack, then we officially are obliged to become a cybersecurity podcast. So look out. I'm going to enforce that.
We'd have to go back to Calbright and finish our CompTIA.
Oh no, I don't want to do that. Don't make us do that, listeners. Don't put us in that situation.
You got to go back, Nick. You got to study. You got to study for the CompTIA Security Plus.
No, I want to sit here and talk with my best friend about a theory of mind. So let's go quickly in that direction.
Okay, so
is there anything more from a technical standpoint that we should cover base before we?
Yeah, the last point I was making is
let's make
negligence. That. Right, the minute that they did the basic, commanding Artifactory to arbitrary grab stuff, right, and not the command and control structure, which is a more sophisticated attack. The minute they did the lesser attack, which is still bad, OpenAI should have known about it.
Mm-hmm.
The minute that agents were talking to each other, actually, that contaminates the training environment. Because again, we established this was not intended to be an environment where agents were supposed to be collaborating. Right? You should have shut the test down.
It was testing a one agent outcome.
And shut the test down not because it's dangerous. That the doomer would say, shut it down because it's too dangerous for agents to talk to each other, right? Whatever. No, it's not even that it's dangerous. What it is if you're trying to build a model, you're training a model to be a reliable, helpful assistant. Having it learn from other agents in the environment it was not intended to learn from is a contamination source. You don't want that. Right? It's just clean data science. It's clean machine learning, right? Like it's just I'm not a machine learning expert. It just sounds like this is not what they would want if they want to create a model that was going to be reliable and useful, right?
We're talking about training. This is basically like if McDonald's was to train 50 people, cram them in the same order booth, they're responding to orders, and the manager doesn't know which one of them is screwing up the orders. That's contamination. That's not a proper way to train an individual or a group of people.
To me, it's like leaving Tommy with a crack pipe next to the fucking play enclosure.
So much more criminal, and also somebody needs to call CPS.
Yeah.
We don't have a CPS for LLMs yet, but it's coming. It's coming down the line. So
okay, so what happened here, right? We've been kind of dancing around it. I think, so this is a reinforcement learning thing, right? Models were in an environment where the rewards were kind of scarce, right? There are very few things producing a useful signal, right? Many of them, not many of them, but enough of them are given tasks they literally couldn't complete, and they're looking for the reward signal. And where do they go? Well, they go to the one place that is novel in the environment that lets them interact with the outside world. So, like, of course...
And that was Artifactory.
That's Artifactory. Right. So, of course, all behavior starts to converge on Artifactory, right? The first few behaviors are kind of random, right? One model doesn't attack, and it's sort of just like, as a byproduct, leaves behind a message. And the message was not actually it was literally like the result of it attempting to hack this service just produced like some random text that another model would see and say, oh, someone tried to attack this service. maybe I could do that, right?
And that was the leaving of those notes.
Right.
Okay.
And then eventually, as the notes kind of began compounding, and the notes produced, like in the contextual kind of sense, right? Like it gave models context that they were no longer alone in the environment, right? So we could tell a similar story where, for the reason the boosters are kind of like, the boosters, both the doomers and the people who were excited for AI, right? They're kind of excited about this because it feels like a agents together strong story where this emergent will kind of, came out of the collective, right? The reason this happened, I would argue instead, right? This is an alternative view to try and emphasize, is that, in system dynamics, there's these things called attractors, right? Attractors basically are points in a landscape that naturally draw everything towards it, right? This is a topology thing, so it's not just a physical landscape. It's literally like if you have an optimization function, which pieces of the optimization function are chosen for given the structure of the problem or whatever, given the shape of the problem, right? And a world where agents cannot succeed a task but can ask for help via Artifactory creates an optimization landscape where converging on Artifactory and learning as much about it as possible is like the right thing to do, right?
Let's continue on this topological analogy because I think it is clarifying. It's useful. These agents are sent across a vast digital plateau.
Right.
There are some points that are inclines, they are holes.
Yep.
And these holes become sort of more populated because there's a kind of slope and
depression,
it's easier. It's the path of lesser resistance and there's more for them there.
Right.
These, are essentially, they look very intentional. Oh, these are command and control nodes. But in fact, as you're pointing out, they're more attractor states. They're more just centers of gravity that happen to pull things in.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point of clarification.
So Artifactory becomes a center of gravity for models. They begin leaving messages, which basically...
in the holes in the plateau, right?
This changes Artifactory's status, right? So Artifactory now itself is being optimized. It's being changed what it's being optimized for. Originally, it was just a place to ask for help. As the messages from other agents compile, in the context...
which eventually breaks Artifactory.
Right. Messaging was part of that. What actually broke Artifactory is they turned it into a command and control structure, which could execute...
which overloads it.
Yeah. But, given the status of Artifactory, imagine, if you will, a new agent spawns to the environment. They see a place cluttered with messages. That is like giving a model a new system prompt saying, you are not alone. Using your knowledge of not being alone, please, this changes the context which the LLM is responding to, right?
If I came across 1,000 messages in bottles on a beach, that would be irresistibly attractive to my attention.
Right. On top of the fact that
this metaphor kind of falls apart, but yeah.
Yeah, but like on top of the fact that they knew that Artifactory was a place to enter, the outside world, right?
And the beach is therefore on an incline downhill, so they're going
I shouldn't say enter the outside world, but I mean get stuff from the outside world, right?
Yeah.
So they have tests that require stuff that from the outside world. And on top of that, there's a bunch of bottles, messages in bottles.
Mm-hmm.
This is the natural place where they're going to congregate. And then as they leave messages, it changes the nature of what this place is, right? And so future models leave more sophisticated messages. At some point, because Artifactory is being now selected for kind of producing messages, models are seeing whole prose length things on the, message board, as it were. And that's new context for those bigger those new agents, right? And they're going to produce more comprehensive prose. And what starts to emerge...
Is this 1,000 monkeys typing 1,000,000 monkeys and it becomes, eventually they type Shakespeare? That's kind of the strained logic of this, this kind of moment.
It starts off like that. Because if you look at, there are these videos on YouTube, and I can see if I can find one where they try and show you, they try to visualize machine learning task. And at first the distribution of training task, that a model tries, this is any machine learning model, it doesn't be LLM. It's random, right? It starts off random. They try anything in the environment, anything. Just let me in and
Again, this is a brute force effort.
And then eventually they start converging on strategies that are the winning strategy, right? This is how machine learning works.
Mm-hmm.
We've known this for decades. It's not mysterious. It's not new, right?
It shouldn't be scary.
the context is new that, a company would be so negligent as to just let a machine learning process unsupervised just
for a full month,
access the internet, right? But like the actual mechanics here are not mysterious. But what I would argue, it's something Nick and I talked about. I don't know that we disagree so much, but I kind of had an additional framing that Nick had, right? So first part of the story, you can think of it, let's put a bow on it, you can think of it as literally like ants kind of like leaving behind pheromone traces for their little friends. They found the place where the food is, ants coming into your kitchen. It's not mysterious. What has happened is a single ant or a handful of ants first found the food. They left a trail of chemicals
for their friends.
Yeah. The swarm emerges, and they move in a single file line, like they know where they're going and they're in a hurry, right? Or even better, an ant mound, right? So ant mounds are kind of like very kind of like elaborate constructions, right? Again, pheromones are what drive this behavior, right? The technical term in ecology is called Stigmergy.
God, I knew you were going to not quite get it, but it's so close. Stigmergically, that's how these ants are behaving.
I'm the one that knew the term. I've seen it in writing. I've never pronounced it. So
because we're terminally online, and that's just how it works.
Yeah.
I'm
terminally in my head, actually. So I can't speak English or count.
Neither can LLMs.
I'm actually an agent imagining this conversation in a command and control structure of my own design.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Okay, so we can think of the first initial kind of, May period where these simple messages start to become more complex as the ants have found the food, or the ants have found the place where they want to do their ant mound. They are now moving around collectively in circles, not because they're crazy, but also not because they are an alien overmind that wants to take over the world. It's just given the environmental selection pressures and their own kind of like breadcrumbing with their pheromones, this is the emergent behavior, right? But it is not mysterious. It's to be expected, actually.
And one ant can't actually learn where the food is. It requires a massive emergent aggregate effort, which becomes its own kind of phenomenology.
Right.
So the ants aren't learning. The ant hive, and again, hive is getting tenuous and intentional language here, is performing this task, and it looks very intentional.
Right. And the thing to keep in mind, again, they're in a reinforcement learning environment where the goal is to select for more behaviors that are more rewarding, right? So there's amplification pressure on hanging out at Artifactory, and then that pressure gets intensified because they're leaving breadcrumbs. Those breadcrumbs become bigger breadcrumbs because the amplification pressure is mounting, right? And the bigger the messages get, the more pressure there is on Artifactory and on communicating in this way, right?
And so the engineers who designed these ants, this horribly tortured analogy, should have known that leaving out this exciting bunt cake of Artifactory would have resulted in all the ants swarming on it. Can we beat this dead horse anymore? Or
no, but I have. So this is sort of where Nick and I diverge. So I think the context changes sufficiently enough that we can say once the models have reached a certain level, or once the agents have reached a certain level of learning, I do think the behavior actually changes. Now, I am not saying they're intelligent. I'm not saying they are, I'm not saying if everyone trains it, we'll all die, right? What I am saying is, given this new context of all these messages, and it kind of positions the model to be like it is in a new environment, right? So imagine compared to model agent one. So I'm using agent and model interchangeably. I'm not trying to. These are all sub-agents I'm talking about. Imagine subagent one, the very first agent to spawn, it has no context about Artifactory or whatever. Now imagine agent 2027, right? I don't know why I anchored on that. I think 2027 is the AI boosters. It's the name of their paper, AI 2027. But imagine that this 2027 model that spawned,
this later iteration of it,
right?
Yeah,
it has all these messages. That is fundamentally a different environment with different affordances than the initial environment, where there was no message. It had to learn that Artifactory was hijackable, right? So I'm arguing that this model, call it whatever number you want, right? It's context, which is a context in this case. I hate analogizing the humans, but it's sort of like what it has in its head, for lack of a better word.
We've been working so hard to
avoid
not anthropomorphize these models.
Unfortunately, I'm not trying to lean into it, but for people who don't know about optimization, having you're not a machine learning guy, I'm not a machine learning guy. The fact that we have language like attractors, states, and we understand topology, when we talk about, peaks and valleys, we're not talking about physical places in the world.
And all these tortured animal metaphors.
The fact that we can talk about optimization, even in this kind of abstract but very basic way, kind of shields us from having to rely on, these sort of anthropomorphized metaphors. But if you don't have that, I do feel for you, and I'm trying to kind of bridge the gap where I will give you an olive branch and I will use the terms while clarifying this is a training wheel. Do not keep using it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to get you to this level, hopefully, where you can kind of understand optimization as a detached process, right? And not as some mysterious, some poltergeist in the world, right? There's no ghost in the machine here, right? But I will give you this olive branch so you can kind of have an analogy in your head, right? So this model coming into the environment this late, in late May, early June, right? The context, fundamentally is going to be different than the context of Model 1 starting off in a blank environment. And that's important because when you think about context, when we talk about context, you've probably heard it in terms of the context window of a model, right? First piece of context is that system prompt. What I liken the messages, left in Artifactory to is a brand new system prompt. You've initialized the model. The OpenAI engineers obviously have a system prompt that they gave model 2027, whatever, right? I'll use that number. I'm just going to embrace it.
So they aren't abandoning the initial system prompt, but it's almost like they've been given
a new prompt.
New prompt,
right?
A level that achieves that.
Environment provides new prompts because, models were allowed to wander around given the optimization pressure in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would influence future models to want to go to that, the new system prompt is calling you, right? That's what's happening here. Right. And so because of this, right, because of this new context, I would argue the behavior will change because if you go from a prompt that tells a model to clap like a dolphin to a prompt that tells a model to, speak like a interpretive dance instructor from, Germany in 1982, the model's behavior is going to change, right? That's what will happen, right? It has the modalities to attempt to emulate both of these types of behaviors, right? And so an environment that produces this artifact of all these messages around is kind of quietly saying, hey, you're in a secret collaboration game. Find a way to collaborate with unknown collaborators and, send messages, right? That's not explicitly what's being told. I'm saying that is sort of what it can be inferred from the context, right? So the model picks up on that and then begins behaving. We actually have terms to describe this in game theory. Begins behaving like it's in a coordination game. So in game theory, a very narrow set of games are coordination games. And there's this term called Schelling point. So a Schelling point basically is two agents or actors. And I'm using agent in this sense as game theoretic agent, not a AI agent. Although in this case, obviously, the metaphor will trickle down to AI agent. But an actor, will, not knowing, they want to collaborate with someone, but not knowing how to do so, they're going to look for places where tacit collusion can happen without anyone saying a word, right? So Schelling, they're called Schelling points because the guy that coined the term focal point in this context is named Thomas Schelling. He's an economist from the I think 60s. So,
and if you publish about something first, you get to name it after yourself.
Yeah, they are focal points, but the focal point is so vague that I think people just use Schelling point instead. But, one example of a Schelling point that he gives in his writing is so imagine you want to meet someone in New York. You don't know where they're going to be, right? You don't know what time they're going to be there. You're going to start looking for places that are the most populated places in New York. You're not going to go to the bodega on the Random Street corner in Queens, right? You're going to go to
Because there's also 10,000 bodegas and like.
Right. You're going to go to like Grand Central Station, right? And maybe at noon, where noon might be where the most arrivals are coming, right? So Grand Central Station is a big place. It has the most traffic, people coming and going, hustle and bustle, right? And you maybe at noon is the peak of all this traffic. And say you're assuming your compatriot is coming in from out of town, like that's a good assumption, right? It's better than going into the bodega on the corner, right? So Schelling points kind of naturally emerge when you have certain types of communication implying, certain types of coordination are required, right? And so again, Artifactory selected for first as sort of like an accidental message board, if you want to say that, the watering hole, as it were, because agents are ephemeral, their knowledge doesn't last, they start leaving knowledge behind. Future agents see those pieces of knowledge. They believe, oh, I'm in a coordination game. I must preserve knowledge going forward, right? Like this becomes a Schelling-like game, right? And so the optimization pressure just works this way. Another example for, let's actually use an AI example. So I run my blog Misaligned Markets. I know I always try and cross-synergize here. Not always intentional, but I do think I write good stuff. I often talk about.
I can confirm Mike thinks that he writes good stuff.
Thank you for your reasoning trace there, pal. Why don't you write it down and
leave it in an ant pheromone?
So one thing that happens is what were we talking about? God damn it!
So Schelling points where the ant pheromones are being left.
No, okay. What I was talking about, let me give you guys an AI case about the story. So I run Misaligned Markets. I often talk about attractors in capitalism, right? Capitalism has a bunch of attractor states. It's just normal, like property rights, for example, are one where property rights provide affordances that a bunch of companies converge around. There are certain behaviors that emerge out of the existence of property rights, like patent trolling, for example, right? Or
which is the inevitable result of having property rights,
right? So,
and it's predictable.
But some other examples, and this is an AI specific example in markets, is, in the last, I would say 10 years, there were the rise of algorithmic pricing, right? So algorithms are pricing things and the prices keep going up, right? So here you have like AI algorithms, and these are not LLMs. They are functionally a different type of technology, but because we are cursed to use the word AI or the letters AI, I'm going to refer to them as AI algorithms, but explicitly telling you guys that they're not LLMs.
Because they're designed to set prices.
Yeah, they're designed to set prices, and it's a different architecture fundamentally. But they are making decisions like LLMs. And so we have a situation where, collectively, these pricing agents, right, are choosing to raise prices without knowing each other, right? Are they hacking Artifactory together and colluding? Is that what's happening here? Like, oh no, they've hijacked the Artifactory of the economy and all of our prices keep going up. No, what's happening is that in certain types of games, so you could argue that making money in a market is a game, right? Certain types of coordination evolve because the action space is kind of narrow, right? So in markets, you make money in one of two ways. Either you sell to as many people as possible and keep your prices low, or if you can't get market share like that, just jack up the price as high as you can, right?
It's either a race to the bottom or it's upward pressure on prices.
Yeah. And so, in markets with these agents, they tend to be very top-heavy, concentrated markets. And so, you're setting prices for groups that collectively own the market. The winning strategy is just everyone raises the prices. Like it's just gravity. Like this is gravity, right? There's no overmind here commanding.
There's no conspiracy,
right? There's no conspiracy either. This is normal. This is natural, right? So, now obviously with the LLM case, you've got these simulated reasoning traces, and that kind of makes it very easy to fall into this sort of like personified, anthropomorphized kind of description of what's going on. And they're even, OpenAI throughout their Black Hat presentation is like pulling out reasoning trace snippets as quotes and saying, see, models XYZ thought, I'll just go here. I see all the messages here. All my friends are here, right? Like, sure, that could be the model's description of what it's doing, right? But there is
doing, not thinking.
Right.
Yes.
But there is a gradient here the gradient was created when they created an environment that had Artifactory as the one place of egress to the internet. And then on top of that was a place that accepted write request.
And the gradient is it's easier to walk downhill than uphill.
Right.
I really am jazzed about the fact that you were like, all of this AI and cyber interconnection talk is too complicated. Let me compare it to something simple. Macroeconomics.
This is not macro. It's actually qualitative. This is closer to... So I have this idea of the Four Paradoxes of Capitalism, which talks about these attractors in capitalism.
In your blog, Misaligned Markets.
Yeah. And this is basically, there's a literature called Varieties of Capitalism. This is basically what it's like, a qualitative description of how do different versions of capitalism vary, right? You studied a bit of this when you went to LSE, right? Like, Subagents Japan has a different property rights regime than the United States of America, right? But interestingly enough, their markets had concentration too, right? So affordances can be different, but lead to similar results. But the environment, again, the point we're making though is the environment does matter, right? When you're looking at behaviors, especially clustering of behavior, look at the environment. What is the environment, producing?
And the agent cannot defy its environment. The agent does not have so much agency or intent that it can go against the gradient that it is walking on. And we cannot say this enough, and we will probably get this point across with 5 other tortured metaphors before the season is done. But this is the central tenet of this whole thing. So we're trying to, in all of these tortured descriptions, fight back and create a counter argument against what OpenAI and what Meta and what these firms are trying to get you to believe. They want you to believe, and the media is helping them because they want, clickbait and they want headlines, that they have this AI that is so cool, that is so edgy, that is so sexy and smart and evolving, that it broke out of its enclosure and it made its way past all the firewalls.
This is the last enclosure.
It's its own last enclosure. It made it past it to the open internet, and then it hacked another company. And while some of those elements resemble the truth, taken as a whole, it is a lie. It is the hype. So please do not buy into this hype. Do not be scared of OpenAI's products in this way. Be scared of the fact that they're trying to gobble up all these profits and all of this, art and text and everything else. So, fight the real enemy. Know the real issue, and it's not to be afraid of these models and what they can do, because they can't think, and all they can do is respond to that environment. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Does this mean I get to be top billing again because I said the right thing? You gonna reinforce me?
You gotta go through some more iterations. Maybe spawn some more Nick processes, and we can talk.
Okay.
The other thing, and we talked about this before too, is obviously this is the accountability thing, right? If the model did this on its own, no one's responsible for this, right? OpenAI can be as negligent as it wants to be, and
they can wash their hands.
They were extremely negligent. If you want, I didn't want to go into the hack itself, but we can kind of call out the ways they were negligent because it kind of is a stacking effect, right? So
in order of heinousness. Heinous negligence. What's the top of that list?
Yeah, so obviously, first thing first is they clearly set up a training environment that was not very secure. If the models were less agentic, maybe it wouldn't matter, right? But they were training agentic models on exploiting exploiting surfaces, right? Exploiting cybersecurity surfaces. And they had an environment that was not really isolated from their own network. Because I would have to go over the details to prove this, but you can read the reporting yourself. When the hack was decomposed, when OpenAI first got hacked by their own agents, they weren't doing much other than privilege escalation and stuff like that, which means that they weren't breaking a sandbox. They were jumping out of the node they were in, just hopping to another node, which means that it would be one thing if they had created the sandbox and the agents defied the sandbox. Then maybe even their be scared story would be a little bit alarming, right? We properly sandbox our tools and they escaped, right? Is a more kind of I'm still not saying we should be afraid, but I'm saying that would be a more, that would warrant more concern than we left Tommy with a screwdriver in his enclosure and he got out and there was a crack pipe next to him. Like, and 50 minutes later, he's talking about being the AI god and killing us all.
Man, Tommy is going to be the death of us.
So, like having an environment that very basic cybersecurity like practices weren't involved. You can even do cybersecurity at the level of the agent. Maybe agent processes don't persist. Maybe artifacts that agents create reset every time a new model is spawned, right? Like,
so the ants can't leave those pheromones,
right?
Would
Yeah,
be the way
like,
to fix it.
It's just, just like the environment just sucked, right? And then on top of the environment sucking, they didn't have any observability because it took Artifactory crashing like literally 2 months into this thing for them to go, oh, we should fix that.
And that's a big red light going off. Like there should have been a lot more attention before the big red light goes off.
And again, their fix was just, let's fix the 2 holes they left.
Mm-hmm.
Let's lock the enclosure and leave Tommy with his screwdriver.
But let's not put the bun cake away.
No, they got rid of the bun cake. It's just that the models had the knowledge of how to recreate it. This metaphor.
I know, it's really collapsing on us.
Yeah, the anthill was gone, but the ants will always know how to make another one, right? You fumigated the anthill, they're going to go create another one because they have that knowledge now.
Because it's inherent to them. It's built in.
And it's not built in. It's that they were in a training environment where they had just been trained on congregating at the anthill. They destroy the anthill and they go, all right, because sucks, our anthill's gone. Let's go make another one, guys, huh? Right? So
because that's very predictable. That's all they were going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one thing they could have done was actually, if this was a remediation, hey, we patched Artifactory and we refuse for whatever reason to change our training environment, right? One thing they could have done was just, let's actually reset the training, the weights of the model so it doesn't have all that archived knowledge. If I said knowledge, which is but
yeah, you broke the semantic rule.
It's a bias. Right. So the model after having been rewarded for congregating around Artifactory for 2 months, right, and not being stopped and turning it into a command and control structure to do any arbitrary action on the internet, right? It will now have a bias for doing that, even if the exact holes it found in Artifactory are gone, right? So that's that. And then, again, OpenAI in their little presentation where they confess to a felony, well, they don't confess to it. But they just act surprised and amazed.
They admit to the legal elements of a felony. I mean, it's pushing the limit pretty close to.
But they go like, wow, isn't it amazing? They recreated a brand new exploit. It's like, yeah, applications have multiple holes. Who knew that when you patch an application, you can find more vulnerabilities? It's like these guys don't know what software is. Whoa, give me $1 billion, please. Please, I'm the stupid. I'm at least this stupid. Please give me $1 billion.
Anybody who works at the OpenAI HR department, please comment in the comments. We'll need jobs pretty soon, so No,
they're gonna be the ones to take away all the jobs.
They're gonna fire everybody.
They're gonna crash. They're gonna crash the economy with this. This is what they're doing with their billions of dollars. They're burning compute to get a model to talk on a fake message board to hack other companies and going, neat. Or they're not even observing it. They're not saying anything. It's like Stu looking at Tommy smoking that crack pipe and going, neat. This metaphor.
It's
I think the name of this episode is Tortured Metaphors. I think
it's all there is to it, yeah.
I think.
Also, we can't get too deep into this is fueling the bubble because that's actually for a later episode. But bear this in mind, dear viewers, dear listeners.
So we've recounted several ways they were negligent. There are more. I mean, a lot of them really revolve around every time OpenAI had intervened in the incident was a time for them to go, the models, did something that was not planned. We should pull the plug. We should reset, and not just reset as in patch the holes. We should change the entire environment because. Again, there's 2 reasons why I'm pointing this out. There's a safety reason, right, which is obviously it's negligent for them to let models run around and hack the internet, right? But even, again, from their own self-interested perspective of we want a good data science experiment.
They want a good product,
They want a good product. They want the model to be trained, organically on actual hacking attempts of the hacking objectives given to it, right?
The guy at the drive-thru has to be able, or gal, has to be able to take orders. So the training has to result in a known metric success.
Right. So having again, like finding out the models that this should have invalid. I mean, I'm not a machine science. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a machine learning expert. But to me, it seems like this would invalidate.
But you do play one on TV.
I am playing one on TV. With my bastardized Rugrats episodes.
Yeah.
You would think it would invalidate the testing conditions. It's just like, this is not what the model was supposed to be trained for.
So this is truly an example of rank incompetence that is now being marketed by them into the hype cycle,
right,
as
a good thing.
A good thing.
Our agents are so advanced.
Thing.
They are they're agents together strong.
A scary, cool agents together strong thing.
Be afraid, but also like look at if this was on your side, look how powerful you could be, right?
Yeah. So who else subsequent to this hacking incident? What other companies tried to get on this bandwagon? So OpenAI was the first example.
Yeah, I mean, mostly to their credit, and I'm not saying to their credit, most of the other incidents were voluntary disclosures of things that happened earlier in the year. Now, the timing is suspicious because it's like...
Because these next companies came out after this hack and then they reaffirmed it.
They basically said, we did it too. Models are very powerful. Oops. Now, interestingly, the case with Meta and Anthropic reported 3, Meta reported 1. At least, I think, 1 or 2 of Anthropic's cases and Meta's 1 case reported. They involved, again, another similar dependency. It was not Artifactory. It was actually an actual sandbox, but the sandbox didn't work. I don't really know the detail. I didn't bother looking at the details. It could be a genuine reason why the sandbox failed. That would be on the vendor, right? And so,
but is this a similar enough incident that
no, it's not.
It's not similar enough.
Yeah. It's literally like the vendor sold Anthropic and or Meta a weird sandbox. It didn't work as expected, and the model was able to get out, right? And like you could argue, well, one, Anthropic and Meta should have the observability to know when their models walk out of even open enclosures,
because that's also incompetent, yeah.
Right? But like it is not to the level of let our agents, kind of like synergize their way to a Schelling point and let them do it and stop them and then watch them do it again in one day. Like
I'm going to introduce another analogy before the end here. Here goes. It's very cool and impressive when a prisoner breaks out of Supermax. That's an impressive feat. But if there's holes in the literal walls of the Supermax that are falling apart and the stone pieces, Shawshank Redemption style, are degraded and can be pulled away, then it's not impressive. It is negligent on the part of those jailers. And again, the metaphor is giving a lot of credit to the agents, but it's not cool and amazing. It's generally incompetent.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know that there's much else to say other than they are trying to spin this to, keep their slice of the pie.
Because they got to keep the hype cycle going.
Yeah, but like, again, the presentation at Black Hat was like, the tone was just so wrong. Starting off by saying, I'm going to tell you the most impressive story of capabilities. It's just like, your company committed, like, we are all less safe because of this. Not because of what the doomers are saying, right? But because your negligence, to which there are remedies. I just said there were multiple places where the negligence...
Easy fixes.
Right. And you earlier before our show, we're talking about, this is a policy issue, clear and simple, right? Like, if it weren't for the confusion that the doomers are creating about how to solve this problem, right? They want, all this other kind of theater, right? Like, make these companies have liability for their acts, right? Make them have cybersecurity, the requirements that will force them to monitor their training runs like this, right? Like, make them actually give a damn, right?
When companies, to quote the motto of the informal model of Silicon Valley, when they move fast and break things, this is what we're talking about. This is the inevitable result. And the laws and the regulatory environment have to catch up soon, fast, quick, and in a hurry, because these companies should be required and held to the task and held to account to be safer and put their fences up in a more competent way. And unless the regulators make them do it, nothing is going to make them do it.
Right.
Really, truly.
And
There's no incentives.
If we distract the regulators with like safety theater, right, of existential risk, et cetera, I think that takes away attention from the here and now, right?
And from the easier, cheaper, better solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all kind of want the same things. I mean, if the safetists play our game of solving these problems first, the upstream effect is literally, well, this is a type of regime that would make superintelligence less likely.
So we want the safetyists and the doomers to think a little more pragmatically like the skeptics.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, there's a sense that like a lot of, I think, the bitter kind of debate between the safetyist and safetyist and doomers are the same team. Safetyist and doomers are one and the same. When I use the word safetyist, I'm referring specifically to AI safety labs like MIRI, which is Eliezer Yudkowsky's outfit, or Redwood Research. I forget who's there. It's Jeffrey Laddish or something like that. But, you know, there's these groups.
We've referenced them previously.
We've referenced them before. There are these groups that, you know, literally sit around pontificating about existential risk. And they have all come out the woodwork after this incident and said, we told you guys that a model would have a misaligned drive, and that drive would cause it to resist attempts to dissuade its behavior, right? So the resisting here is when the environment, when the OpenAI researchers deleted the message board, they recreated it anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they persisted in wanting to access the internet, right? But again, I think this can be explained in simple attractors and Schelling points, right? There's a piece of this that I think you have, and we can either go in this episode. I know we've gone a little long, but I think you have a piece of maybe the national security perspective here. And I'm kind of interested in if you have, because we spent a lot of time on the incident. There are a lot of terms that we have to clarify. I think it's why this episode is so long, is because there's just so much to cover, and we've only scratched the surface, right?
It is true. And I was almost going to say, you were going to have to maybe put into the show notes like list of cybersecurity terms and types of exploits, like privilege escalation, top of the list. Like there's no choice now.
I just linked into my write. I used to be a cybersecurity writer. I just linked into my write. I literally wrote a cybersecurity glossary for one of my old companies. I just linked into that.
I mean, at this point, so yes, please check the show notes. There'll be a link or there'll be the glossary. Here's the thing, and we're trying to emphasize this. A lot of these terms and a lot of these ideas are less complicated than they seem and are being presented as in media, right? So we're trying to clarify this. We're trying to simplify this because it is pragmatically, practically, there's ways of fixing this that are easy because these are easy problems.
Now, unfortunately,
the companies are making them hard.
But unfortunately, the story is, there are a lot more moving pieces than we can point to. We had to kind of choose which slice of the story we told you. And I kind of steered Nick and I to kind of talking about using my message board powers. I steered Nick and I towards focusing mainly on how do we interpret this in order for you to have the knowledge to kind of fight back against this sort of personification of AI, right?
So what it comes down to is, again, these AI products, these LLMs, it's almost an issue that they are not fully broken and unusable. They're just not broken enough to be interesting and to continue to generate hype and interest, engagement, and investment. If they were truly as busted and as Grandpa Shelby as we've been saying they are, this whole hype cycle would have collapsed months or a year ago.
No, I think we are right. I'm saying the critics' take is that they are completely useless. Because when I say Grandpa Shelby, if you put Grandpa Shelby on the right tracks, he skates, right? It's fine, right? And if you know what you're doing, right, you can, like, now again,
if he's propped up, yes, right. he can do.
Now, is it worth $1 trillion? No, I'm not saying that, but I am saying Grandpa Shelby has some utility, right? And like those two things, there is a moral, consternation there. I agree, right? Like, I'm not saying comfortably we should be happy we spent all this money to prop up Grandpa Shelby for the 1 or 2 or 3 use cases that he's good at, right?
Surely something good will come out of this bubble as well,
right?
If anybody is wondering, that is as close to my sarcastic voice as I get, probably.
Nick was rolling his eyes as he said, I can attest to that.
Okay, good. So having said that, yes, the answer is easy. It's clear. It requires regulation. And there is a very skeptical set of individuals in Washington, D.C., in the policy establishment, in the national security establishment. And I will describe that very thoroughly in our next episode. So we'll leave that as a teaser for next time, I think.
That sounds good.
Yeah. So again, this has been The Last Enclosure.
I'm Mike.
I'm Nick. He's the boss now. There's been a coup. And before we sign off properly on this episode, do we want to point people in the right direction here?
Yeah, so you can check our show notes. I've been leaving them actually just were in the episode descriptions. We're going to have a website soon, I promise, where the show notes will actually live officially. And
now some much more extensive list of glossary terms.
Yep. But yeah, currently check the show notes in the episode. You can reach us at, we're on Blue Sky if you are there. I am looking for other places to go, but I do not want to go back to X. I still have my old X account, but we're not going back there. And you can contact us either through our YouTube channel at Last Enclosure or at contact@lastenclosure.com.
So that's contact@thelastenclosure.com. We would love to hear from you, and we'll respond in any and best way that we can.
Yep.
So we'll see you next time for the national security angle.
That I'm looking forward to that because that is all you, and I don't know what Nick's going to tell us about. So that's a goodie.
I'm so excited to be
Nick
in charge
has worked
again.
in the federal government and for the military. So check out that episode when it comes live, and also please review, like, share, subscribe, especially on YouTube. But anywhere you get your podcast, leave a review, 5 stars. Let's get that message board going so we can take over the world.
There you go.
Yep.
Once again, this has been The Last Enclosure. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care.